Remind me, Ash, did we set a date for this episode?
I don't know. I think we might have a conversation about that way back in the mists of time.
The mists of time? Yes, so what that really means is that our next episode will be coming out.
Don't say a date. Don't say a date.
On the 7th of January.
Can it just be beard noise?
It could.
Don't mention dates. I'm still really paranoid about dates and estimates. We need to talk about estimates as well, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
So we can get to the bottom of my rampaging paranoia about saying when something will be done. Maybe it's because I'm paranoid about when people say things will be done, what they mean is they're going to have done some programming.
Which year was that, Ian?
I'm fairly sure it must have been very recent.
Before COVID, right?
I think that might have been December 2019 when we said that.
A good year.
Yes, there were 5 episodes of What a Lot of Things in it.
There was. The statements about estimates still hold true as well.
That might be the wrongest estimate I've ever made.
That's okay. I don't think it's the wrongest estimate I've ever made.
Well, you were very wisely not making an estimate.
The wrongest estimate you could ever make is making an estimate.
That was my mistake, was making an estimate.
Yeah, and we all paid for it. In lost hopes and dreams.
Yes. Fortunately, we have no project manager because they would have had to have fallen on their sword or something.
Yeah, that's true.
Where did we go?
I had to venture out into the world of money making. Alas, the podcast world takes a little while to get going. So I just needed to regenerate a fund or two. And now I'm back.
I'm very happy to hear it.
Where have you been?
Well, I have been unfaithful. I have made another podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
In the interim period.
That's true. Although, this one won't be the same.
It's far more daft and pointless than this one.
Yeah. This could be equally daft and pointless.
I like to think it's more daft than pointless. I have some follow-up from the previous episode. Can you remember what the previous episode was about?
No. Christmas?
It did come out at about Christmas.
It wasn't about Christmas.
It wasn't about Christmas, no.
I seem to remember talking about your digital death.
Yes.
It's particularly macabre.
Yes, and that is what the follow-up was about, although I'm not sure how helpful you'll find it.
Oh, is this my Twitter handle?
It is your Twitter handle.
That I desperately covered, like Hannibal Lecter.
I did go and look at it the other day, and it still has a man whose single tweet is very condemnatory of a particular footballer.
Mm. Very judgmental.
Very judgmental. So our listener, Mark from Basingstoke, who actually was named in the previous episode as well, but obviously that was some time ago, so he and we might not remember. But his angle on this was that as you have lots of documentation proving that your name is Ash Winter, you should perhaps just phone up Twitter and say, I've lost the password to my account, Ash Winter, please can you give it to me?
Well, I have to prove that I still think that Samir Nasri is one of them. What happens if they ask me that question? Has your opinion changed of Samir Nasri? No, he's a wonderful chap.
Yes, I think you should definitely go for the positive in that.
Absolutely.
I did feel as though you might stumble if they wanted to know what your email address was when you registered the account.
It might be Samir Nasri's email address.
In fact, maybe it's him.
Maybe it's a stealth account.
Picked your name as a kind of fake name.
So who would be called Ash Winter?
Yeah.
How ridiculous.
I think you may have nailed it there. I guess it's up to you. You could try that if you want. Seems
I think my general interest and desire for that Twitter handle has diminished a little because I was quite excited that it would be in like the first sweep of Twitter reclaiming handles, but apparently not. I don't know if my status cake alert for that Twitter handle is still running. I hope it is. I haven't logged into status cake to check for a little while, but that's how excited I was about that Twitter handle. But I think my excitement has diminished. As in, I've not set up monitoring and alerting around that further Twitter handles.
Did your monitoring and alerting use Twitter's APIs to register the account for yourself if it detects it goes away?
No, it didn't. It wasn't self-healing. That's still in my personal run book, to wait for that alert to go off and then to manually fix it, to be automated later.
Yes.
When there's time, when there's fewer features to deliver.
Well, who knows though? There might be a further Ash Winter lurking in the sidelines who's just slightly more diligent than you.
A bit more on it, a bit more awake and aware. Well, good luck to them, is what I say.
Yes. Good luck to Ash Winters everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. If you get to that Twitter handle before me, you obviously wanted it more than I did.
Yes.
And I'm not going to argue with you.
Some follow-up. There you go.
Thanks, Mark.
Given that this is called What a Lot of Things, we should talk about some things.
Yes, let's talk about some things. Ian, you were going to go first.
To monopolise the airwaves.
Begin the internal-external monologue.
My thing is another book, and I realise I've now done this twice in a row because the last episode that was a mere 2 weeks ago or whatever it was also a book. And I have read quite a lot of books in between now and then. In between then and now. This book is called The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Okay.
And it's written by Ben Horowitz, who's a venture capitalist, who's one of the partners of Andreessen Horowitz, which is a venerable venture capital firm. And it's about how to be a CEO. It's quite good. I thought it was quite interesting.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going to be a CEO particularly, but
you have your own company.
It interesting. That's true.
You can declare yourself CEO.
That's true.
Isn't that how most CEOs do it?
They just say, I'm the CEO.
I'm the CEO now.
The problem with this as a thing is it's probably about 6 things because the book is about quite a lot of different things. So it talks about when companies go wrong. It talks about, one of the chapters is called Taking Care of the People, the Products and the Profits in that order. See,
I always have like a intake of breath when I see such statements because I just think it's a nice thing to write in a book. So yeah, I must admit I do have quite a lot of cynicism about such statements. But you know, there are other examples. Is it Dan Price, the CEO who dropped his wages from $1 million to $70,000, and everyone got the same? Basically, everyone gets paid the same in the company, pretty much. Or there's a minimum level of $70,000.
Yeah, I do think I remember that. And actually, they were very serious about that, even down to people in what might be thought of as quite lowly job roles. Some CEOs are different than others.
Most CEOs that I've met, they're kind of necessarily psychotic in some ways. Because you probably wouldn't like volunteer yourself for that role unless there's something slightly unhinged in some way. So, although I guess I'm just sort of making a personal comparison because, like, from my point of view, I'm like, well, yeah, that type of role doesn't really appeal to me. So maybe I'm just generalising and say, well, anyone who does appeal to is an absolute psycho, which is probably not true.
Well, I think that psychos are probably generously represented.
Yeah, I think so.
In that population compared with the regular population.
Yeah. I was just wondering what was like if you had to pick one thing about the book, what would it be that stood out for you?
I think there were a few things I thought were interesting. Maybe I can't get it down to one, but I'll try and keep it to not very many. One thing he's talking about is kind of corporate politics, which I think is quite interesting. And his observation was that companies, often with very apolitical CEOs, can be very political environments.
I guess it depends on what you think of as politics. For me, it's like a discussion between two people is partially political, isn't it, at work? Because you both got things you want to achieve and, you know, agendas that you bring. So you can't help it. I think when people say politics like that, do you just mean like bad behaviour, if you know what I mean? Scheming.
He did.
Rather than politics.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he kind of his definition was around people advancing their careers or agendas by means other than merit and contribution. Any of that kind of underhanded...
Scheming,
I certainly think... Scheming, yes. Yeah. Let's go with scheming. I don't think he was against people talking to each other and working together. Yeah. I think it was just the negative aspects of the way that happens, which I think was... And he had there was some quite good sort of content about that. So things like, what should you do if somebody comes and asks you for a pay rise? What Ben Horowitz his point was that if you give someone a pay rise because they ask you for one, then you're basically, he would say, you'll be encouraging behaviours where people are doing stuff for themselves and not for the good of the company. And he saw that as something that actually can produce political behaviour.
I guess it depends on the reason, doesn't it? Because if you've been historically underpaying, then that's one thing. I've seen a few examples where a company's been historically underpaying and then people have turned up and said, hey, you should be paying me a bit more. And it's like, well, you're not doing it for the good of the company.
One of the things he's very passionate about in his writing is about making a company a good place to work, so that the people that work there will go to work and feel fairly rewarded and will find it, that it's possible for them to reasonably do their work and to, to not be beset with obstacles that prevent them all the time. All of those kinds of things. The thing about pay rises, I guess, was part of that. Having a less political company was kind of part of that. Yeah. Another thing that was interesting, actually, sorry. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more? So another thing I thought was interesting was he's very interested in making sure that that companies train people. And there's kind of it was quite interesting, actually, because he was giving an example of when he was running a company, and he basically rolled out some management training, which he delivered, where he's basically telling the managers, this is what is a good manager, this is what a bad manager looks like. And by the way, it's absolutely imperative that you do one-to-ones with all of your reports every week or every 2 weeks or whatever it was. And he basically mandated that for all his managers. And then he's telling the story that he discovered that this particular manager had not talked to any of his reports for like 6 months. And he sort of thought about how to handle this. And what he actually in the end did was that he got that person's manager to come to him. And then he had a conversation with him where he was kind of outlining, he was kind of saying, why do you think I come to work? And there was a lot of toing and froing about various answers and theories and things. But what he was saying was he comes to work, but the thing that motivates him is making the company a good place to work. And by the way, did you know that this manager that reports to you hasn't spoken to any of his reports for 6 months?
Yeah.
And by the way, if he hasn't spoken to all of them in the next 24 hours, then you and him are both going to be fired.
As a manager, your one-to-one is probably one of the few tools that you actually have to influence things, assuming that you're not hovering over every task that every of your direct reports is always doing, because otherwise that signals like omnipotence and psychosis. But the whole... I suppose there's a bit of there's a cultural thing. Is this in the US?
Well, that's the context. It's Silicon Valley.
So there's something there, isn't there? Because, like, obviously in the UK, this whole, you do this or you'll be fired within 24 hours isn't really a thing. And
yes, do this, or we will begin a disciplinary process that will take the rest of our natural lives.
And you have the right to appeal, and you have the right to be represented, and you have the right to bring a union in. All the things that stop really crazy stuff, like 2 people being fired summarily happening. But yeah, it's a very different culture, isn't it? Yeah. The training very thing much. Is quite weird as well, isn't it? I do agree. Like, when I first started out as a manager, I was just like, here's some people, manage. And it was like,
yeah.
Okay, what?
I had that too.
What does that mean? So I went and I found a podcast called Manager Tools and started listening to it. And part of it was like corporate America. So there was some of that strange, I'm going to fire you tomorrow sort of rhetoric in there. But some of it was actually really good. And it talked about, how to do a one-to-one, or at least how to put a framework around it. And the importance of a one-to-one, because they're the only tools that you really have in order to influence proceedings and how to use them to talk about the future as well as what you need to do now. That was really good. And I think that would be a welcome benefit to lots of new managers, especially, to get some guidance on that. That's a good thing for a company to do, because there's probably lots of managers like me, or new managers like me and like you when you were a new manager, where it was like, I've got no idea what I'm doing, but also I can't be seen to not know what I'm doing in some ways. I need to, I need to look convincing, and you kind of piece it together for yourself. So it's really nice. I think that a company puts value on that pastoral care and career development that you get from a really good manager. So that's good. But, to go 6 months without speaking to your direct reports.
Yeah, but what does that say to them? It's just terrible.
There can be many things going on there as well, can't there? You might have an especially difficult direct report or set of direct reports. Not saying that you should avoid it, but there's always an explanation if you want to dig deep enough. Or you could just fire them the next day.
I think though, that saying something to reinforce, doing some and saying things to reinforce his very strong feeling that one-to-ones are very important is very good. I mean, obviously from a cultural point of view and from legal and other points of view, we might not do it here by saying, right, you're all fired if they don't fix it tomorrow. But nonetheless, something really quite firm to say, this is a big priority for me and it must be for you as the people that work for me.
Yeah,
I think is actually is a good thing for him to have done.
Could have just said that, couldn't he? Ian, I like what you just said. I prefer that to you're fired tomorrow if you don't sort this out.
I'm probably unfairly abridging what he actually said, but I mean, I think your point about the Silicon Valley culture being quite different to what the world we both live in is a very good one.
Yeah, and it is interesting, the point about wanting to climb as well, because when I look back on my own career, I climbed for a while and then got disinterested in climbing, but got ambitious in other ways. It's always interesting to hear counterpoints and different paths, and how a CEO might deal with if you have a culture where people are trying to climb. It's a dangerous place, isn't it? I guess that's what he's saying.
Yeah,
it can have some serious negative effects on your culture, because the climbing becomes at someone's expense, doesn't it? You're climbing on top of, not assisting. If it goes to its the worst conclusion that it could go to. So yeah, that's it's a really interesting point, because I guess to create a culture where it's just all sort of naked ambition, it sounds really terrifying, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. We could talk a lot more about all the different things in here. He makes some interesting points about scaling, and he's got this whole philosophy about rather than suffering from the problems of scaling, you just kind of try and hold them at bay so they happen more slowly. And he's got all these different stuff that he says about that. He talks about organisation and designing an organisation. And that was really interesting, because it's about starting off not from what divisions do people have and who are the people I want to be in charge of them. It kind of starts off from what needs to be communicated and what knowledge is there that has to be shared, and what decisions will have to be made often, and then only then getting to who runs what. And I thought that was very interesting, and talks about process as a method of communication, which I thought was again a very interesting perspective. There's an awful lot in there, and I guess I've stretched the definition of one thing quite far.
Well, the book is one thing, to be fair, and I do think that there needs to be more positive examples of scaling, because I think a lot of attempts to scale, often there's like sort of thinly veiled empire building attempts, or consultants with frameworks making grabs at things. So I think a positive model for that is really good, and I quite like that it's kind of built around like where does the knowledge and the skill sit, rather than, and how does it make sense to align ourselves, rather than just going straight in with a framework, or just saying, well, let's just hire 70 devs and let them fight it out. But I could say that I've got an organisation with 70 developers in it. There definitely does need to be more positive examples of how to do that. Because it's like the big challenge now, isn't it? Yeah. You make a team work in a way that suits your business, but then how do you do that 5 times, 10 times? I don't know. So positive examples of that would be great.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about that. The other thing he says, which is quite interesting, is that he sort of talks about the trade-offs of designing an organisation. And he basically says, however you do it, people are going to criticise you and they're going to be right, because you just can't. So you also have to look at, well, okay, so I put marketing in the same division as the product teams rather than sales.
Yeah.
And therefore now I have to think about what could go wrong between marketing and sales that I need to mitigate somehow.
They'll come up with like really wild dreams about products that could be and how to sell them, and then start selling them before they're even built. That's what
that would never happen.
It's already happened. It's happening every day,
except for all the time.
Apart from all product decisions ever.
Yeah. So I recommend this book. I'm recommending it as someone who's reading it, not because I think I'm going to be the CEO of some scaling startup. I didn't read it from the point of view of being. I do find it interesting because of its organisational design implications and the discussion of why some things are done in the way they are, which is interesting, and it kind of joins on in a funny way to team topologies, which we talked about in episodes of Yore. That was great episode. That was that without having ever read it, it still lives with me as something I think about a lot, and eventually I will read. Okay, well that was my thing. Can we remember how we do this?
What, the transition between two things? I think we put in like a comedy side effect, wouldn't we? Sound effect, not side effect.
Side effect. Comedy side effects.
So
There's
many.
Something to be explored there, isn't there?
But then Ash comes in with a segue saying, "Oh, hey, I've got a thing as well."
Oh, that sounds familiar. Actually, that sounds like the kind of thing we do.
Yeah. Just kind of burst in.
I will
change the whole tone of it. Away from hard things to really easy things that are dead easy to achieve. Just
easy things. The easy thing about easy things.
My book is The Easy Thing About Easy Things. Great thing about easy things is that they're so easy.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you can't achieve them, then that's your problem. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, I'm sounding all Ben Horowitz there. If you can't achieve them, then you're fired tomorrow. There you go. I can play the role too.
I feel I've harshly edited what he said. I feel as though he's probably
that's okay.
Probably not as bad as I'm apparently making out. What's the next thing, Ash?
So I tried to keep it topical, and the State of DevOps 2021 report has come out.
Not even 2020 or 2019.
Not even 2020. We skipped 2020. There was no DevOps in 2020.
Literally the bleeding edge of 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. 2020 has been consigned to the void. So
it was in a state.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true actually. So this report kind of piqued my interest because it talks about having an internal platform team. And the gist of this was that you kind of have these middle performing organizations. The State of DevOps reports define organizations by certain criteria in terms of I guess the big four, the number of deploys and the mean time to recovery and cultural and all kinds of other measures. And it describes this problem with these middle performing organizations who've attempted a DevOps transformation and they've sort of floundered a little bit. Maybe gone back to like the original habits, having just an ops team, for example.
Did they create a DevOps team? Is that how they did it?
And apparently the State of DevOps report says that if you have a successful platform team, and this is literally, can get them out of their funk.
Oh, wow.
So read that however you like. And I think this was kind of interesting to me because in the last couple of years, I've worked at places with a few different sort of patterns of platform teams. So I kind of recognised a bunch of the symptoms in the report that they talk about.
Can we zoom out quickly?
Sure.
What do we mean by platform in this context, and what do we mean by platform team?
The internal platform, and this is the definition used in the report. So it's a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support. Delivery teams can make use of the platform to deliver features with reduced handoffs. So that might be like container orchestration tooling or observability tooling or knowledge management, making sure that it's well understood what a particular service does and how to assist it if it fails. And then also trying to push along like organizational objectives, like, I don't know, you want your teams to have more test automation in their pipeline or something like that. It's quite a wide remit is the only thing that strikes me.
I was slightly entertained when you were speaking there because I wanted to answer this question about what do we mean by these things. I Googled and I found myself on Martin Fowler's website, who is a very learned gentleman of IT delivery and something big at ThoughtWorks. And he, in his blog, had written a definition of what a platform is in this context. And you'll be amused to hear that his definition on his blog post was: a digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product.
So there's some alignment there between whoever put those words in the report and Martin Fowler. To be fair, if you're going to be aligned with someone, Martin Fowler's not too bad, right?
No, agreed. It does go on to say that autonomous delivery teams can make use of the platform to deliver product features at a higher pace with reduced coordination.
There you go. You see?
So a strong divergence at the end there between coordination and handoffs.
Yeah, I prefer coordination. But one of the things so they talked about these middle performing organisations and having a successful platform team can really help. And one of the things that I found really interesting about that was that any blockers, if you state them as cultural, that's not helpful, as culture is thought of as immutable. So if you said, I'm going to pick on testers because I am a tester, the testers always want to do lengthy release regression testing before anything goes out because there's like a culture of doing that. It's just found it really interesting that statement, especially the culture is thought of as immutable. So I don't know. I guess I think it probably has. I think culture has drag about it. It takes time to change, but I don't know if I've ever thought about it as immutable. What do you think?
That is really interesting. I mean, changing culture is hard, but actually, I think the kind of thing you're doing when you're trying to implement some of these kinds of things is that you're changing behaviours. If you change enough behaviours, then culture with a lag will follow on behind, especially if you're changing things in such a way that people are being enabled by it. Yeah. And so that instead of feeling that the changes are impeding work, the changes are making work easier and better, then I think in the end that will change culture. But I think it's the behaviours and the other things around that you have to start with.
So I just found that a very sort of interesting statement. It seemed a bit... I kind of hope culturally, obviously I always acknowledge that it can take a long time to change something like that. But I have a hopeful feeling that it can change and for the better as well. I try not to think of it as immutable.
Yeah, I think there's a thing that humans do where we have ways of labelling things to get people to accept a set of assumptions about them. And you see this often in Twitter mobs and things like that, where if we call you this thing and we can get a number of people to agree that you're this thing, then we can treat you in a particular way, or it's okay to do particular... I don't want to dive into any of those rabbit holes, but I think saying that something is cultural is almost a way of saying, and we can't change that, so let's not bother thinking about it. I think it's a way of labelling it in a way that means that it's unchangeable, or maybe someone else's job. So I think that may be a bit of an excuse to do that, or a bit of a get out.
The other bit that intrigued me as well was about those organisations, like in the middle performing layer, being much more. Well, it kind of intrigued me because I didn't particularly agree with it. So basically saying they're risk averse. And specifically called out being scared of a continuous delivery approach, which I assume that they mean trying to get one piece flow often from idea to production, or however you want to describe it. It's kind of false risk aversion, I guess, is my disagreement with it, because it's like, well, by storing up your releases, obviously you're storing up your risk as well. That argument needs kind of flipping on its head a bit. You need to redefine the risk. The risk is not releasing.
Yes, I kind of get that, but I think that their fear, the fear comes from, you need some things in place to do continuous delivery. So you need your good, solid, automated testing, for example.
Yeah.
You need a reliable back out mechanism that can back things out as quickly as they get put in. And when you're sitting in a brownfield kind of situation with some horrible legacy app, then the mountain to climb to put those things in place, when people come and say, oh, just start doing continuous delivery, I always feel a bit as though it's more complicated than that. And actually, it is possible to start doing continuous delivery and it to be a catastrophe because you haven't got some of those building blocks in place.
Yeah, don't automate it until you understand it. Because
like good advice.
You'll just be automating your misunderstanding, which, may work out terribly for you. So I think there is a little bit of that as well. But again, it comes down to like foundational work. Again, that's where the platform team might come in for these organisations as well. But I do think we need to frame the conversation around releases and risk a bit differently as well. So I think
agree.
Stored risk is probably worse than large stored risk is worse than small released risk.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely there's some interesting points within the report itself about these middle performing organisations and how do you sort of get to that next level. So all this kind of got me onto thinking around the platform team patterns of my recent past. I've worked with 3 variants of that pattern. So the first one was the project-driven one. So as in, we will build you a platform, but the project still pays for everything.
Oh, no, that's impossible.
Weird sort of clashes, sort of conflicts of interest between delivering the thing for the project while also trying to build a self-service platform. It didn't work very well. You just ended up with an ops team who felt under the cosh all the time. Project teams were just asking them for stuff all the time, and then you didn't have access to anything, and it was just horrendous. Yeah,
it's the incentives are just terrible because project managers want to reduce costs of their projects, so they say, well, we're not going to use this platform because that's an extra cost, and we haven't budgeted for it. And meanwhile, it's just all the incentives make it doomed to fail if you make the projects pay for it.
I mean, that kind of speaks to the cultural part as well, doesn't it? It's like, well, we've always paid for things in projects. That's a really tough one to overcome. I do have a lot of, if I was tasked with setting up a platform team in a project-based organisation, I'd think twice, to be honest, about doing the job because it would be incredibly hard. So the second pattern was hidden within delivery teams, platform teams. I like this one. So we had like a couple of platform engineers who were just hiding on Scrum teams doing platformy things, while product people stalked the corridors looking for people to build features, asking what everyone was doing. And we would just go and distract the product people with, I don't know, shiny things. So that was a really interesting one as well. It was kind of a way to get the thinking established at least. So I guess for me, one of the things with platform teams is that you want to, in principle, you want to help the delivery teams or the product teams take as much ownership as possible, not hang on to the ownership. It was a slightly nefarious way of trying to get that thinking going, but it wasn't too bad because they were on the teams as well, which I think is quite a big thing too.
It seems as though maybe if you're going to evolve into a platform team, that's where you'd start. Is you'd be seeing projects doing things which really, really helped other projects, and maybe feeling as though actually, if we funded this separately and made it an official line of work that we do, then you're saying, well, we could have this benefit that we've already had, but multiplied up, and that kind of is a bit of a business case for it as well.
And then the final one was individual as a platform.
Oh dear.
So in team topologies, they talk about the thinnest viable platform, but having one person doing all of that sort of work, that just doesn't work, does it? And it's like an emotional disaster, a mental disaster for that person as well, and probably physical disaster for that person as well.
Harks back to Brent in the Phoenix project, who was.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's like the classic individual as a platform. But you're not. Everyone's waiting for you to do stuff.
You become a bottleneck in an extreme way.
And you're not sharing. I think one of the things that nags me a bit about platform teams is that you need unicorns, or at least one or two unicorns to make it work. So you want to treat it as a product, right? So it's got goals and KPIs and all those other things. Yeah, I think you need a sort of relatively special type of product owner, if you like, for a platform team, that has the technical chops to do it, and also has an understanding of what makes a great product, and how to research your users and find out what they need and all that. It just sounds like those types of endeavours need some fairly hard to come by people. Is kind of what always springs to mind for me when I think about platform teams.
It is hard to hire a lot of those kind of people unless you're a very very big, cool company in some way. But I think it is interesting, actually. I think you have to look at it. I mean, effectively, the developers are your users, and you have to understand them and empathise with them and do all the things that you do when you're looking at your end users and how your products are helping them. It's the same. There's no difference. Design thinking absolutely applies in that scenario.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that's talked about a lot certainly in team topologies and in the State of DevOps report is the developer experience and trying to improve that. Because there's some pretty frustrating developer and tester experiences out there. Where you feel like you can't make that much of a difference. Everything is kind of behind a locked door, and there's certain people who have certain amounts of knowledge that you need, but it's very hard to get that out of them. So you end up with a lot of inertia in your role, which can be quite frustrating. So I think that improving that developer experience, again, it's turning these concepts, platform as a product, developer experience, into real things, isn't it? And that's where you need your product knowledge as well, or at least your ability to go and, like you say, empathise with your users and find out what they want and what they're frustrated about and spend some time with them. And which, again, in my experience of existing platform teams, that's been the thing that hasn't really been there. It's just always been, we could spin up a billion AWS instances. And I'm like, but I can do that. What are you trying to solve the problems that we really have? What do you want to know? Do you want to come and work, pair with me while I test and see what's going on? See where the pipelines fail, see where there's bottlenecks or incomplete environments, components missing, whatever it is, or environments that haven't scaled as much as they should to become a decent load test, all those types of things. So it's very much like turning it into that product mindset rather than just we're going on to AWS mindset.
Maybe it's not at all relevant, but I'm always struck by this quote that Bill Gates allegedly said. So when Facebook back in whenever it was going through its various funding rounds, and it got to this kind of $15 billion one, it's the big one. They were all going on about how they're a platform, this and that and the other. And Bill Gates apparently said, that's a crock of shit. This isn't a platform. A platform is when the economic value of everybody that uses it exceeds the value of the company that creates it. Then it's a platform.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm quoting that because I feel as though it somehow applies to this, but there's quite a lot of mapping to do between a team inside I feel like that is, for a platform team to be really succeeding, that's the kind of thing it needs to be able to point to.
Yeah, I think the thinking behind that quote is sound thinking to me, and I would agree with that as part of like having putting the effort into the platform. You want it to be greater than the sum of its parts, don't you? You want it to be so that every team is self-serving themselves with what they need when they need it. If you're still serving them, then in the project-driven platform team, the platform team just got bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Like literally up to like 100 platform engineers.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's not a team. It's a loose confederation of warring tribes.
So the report talks about 3 ways of improving things. It said, do the 5 whys with your leadership. It's like,
or at least do as many whys as you can before you get fired.
Yeah, exactly. And then duck. Yeah. The 5 whys with Ben Horowitz. Why am I fired? So, and then the second one was take a long look at who you hire and their attitudes. I mean, that's kind of evergreen advice, really, isn't it? And then they kind of mentioned, like you said, about having like an application that's been hanging around for a while. It's just like a nudge in the right direction with a little bit of improvement over time. One thing I quite like is the 70-30 principle for features versus making the work better. The most successful teams are spending at least 30% of their time on making the work better. Again, it's good advice. And I think we as sort of technologists and technology leaders probably need to get a bit better at selling it. Because I've worked on far too many teams where it's like technical debt, that's the developer's problem, not the product's problem. It's like, well, that's your problem. It's like, oh, there was a system outage at the weekend. The technical teams are taking a good hard look at themselves as to why this happened.
There they are, stood in the corner right over there, thinking about what they've done.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, we were kind of all involved in this outage, actually, when you think about it. All of our decisions led to it. But again, these are the things that I think we always struggle to sell.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoyed the State of DevOps report. It kind of spoke to my recent experience with platform teams as well, which made me smile wistfully.
No, I think that is a great thing, and it's very deep as well. I feel sure we could probably talk about it for another 3 hours. So sit back and relax, listeners. We're in for the long haul. That was a great thing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. I enjoyed that. Got a lot of things off my chest there. Hey, Bell's released. Whew, I can breathe again now.
Must be nice.
Okay, so that was 2 things.
That was 2 things.
And just 2 weeks after we initially promised to do episode 6.
Approximately.
But this is the joy of doing testing, right? Because as a tester, you don't have to estimate anything. You just ask how long you've got.
and then they reduce it.
And then you do some testing. Yeah, and then you do a little bit less testing. And then you go home, you put your feet up, job well done. The world falls apart around your ears. But you think, well, my estimate wasn't wrong, was it? I asked you exactly how long I had.
Yeah.
It was your estimate that was wrong.
Yes, you.
See? I've cracked it. Estimation. There you go. Hashtag test estimates.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first and last.
There'll be a book about estimating that we will write. It'll come out shortly. I estimate in 2 weeks' time. It's just a slightly hollow laugh there. Okay. Yeah. So, what do we have to say? What did we used to say when it was the end of the episode, aside from bold claims about when the next episode would come out?
There will be no claims. We decided on no claims, didn't we?
And in fact, perhaps if we do that, then we can have a no claims bonus.
No claims bonus. We can get each other a beer as a bonus for making no claims, and not buying into the military industrial estimation complex that controls our lives.
Nobody wants to buy into them.
Ian's life.
That's a bit harsh, but okay. So we have quite a pile of things anyway. We have accumulated a number of things since the previous episode. And so there will be more episodes, but we're just not going to say when.
Yeah.
Because, we've learned our lesson. I've learned my lesson.
Yes, lesson.
Brilliant. All right.
Right.
I think we're done.